I'm a big fan of the live edge wood, and as such, I've decided to turn one into a bench for use in our photography area up in our local fair. Now, while I absolutely love this side of the wood for all of the detail and that you can see the live edge so well, for a bench, I felt like it looked like this wasn't substantial enough and that people would be afraid to sit on it, even though it's quite thick. This is a very thick board. So I'm going to use this side of the wood, but from the side you'll still be able to see the live edge. The first step is to sand it down so that it's nice and smooth. You don't want anyone to get splinters. And this particular piece, it was milled by my brother. He has a little mill, so it's a nice rough cut, which I actually like, but it does make it so that there's a little more to sand down. I love all the different colors that are in the wood. This particular one was from a downed aspen tree. My brother will go around and pick up downed trees. And so this one had aged for a fair amount of time. And one of the ways you can tell that is that it will have the lines of gray inside it, which kind of gives you that feel of that old wood. Because I'm going for a more rustic look, I'm not going to go any finer than an 80 grit. But if you were looking for a more finished, less rustic look, then you would want to do a finer grit. Then it's just a matter of wiping off all of the dust. This one's kind of fun because it actually has little burrow marks from the ants going into the tree. These are some bench legs I picked up from Amazon. They should work perfectly for just adding to our live edge wood. Now this one, you'll notice, this is the center one, and so it only has 3 holes and doesn't have the side supports. This one has the side support, and that will go towards the center. Now the end of my board is not cut straight because that was just cut with a chainsaw while my brother was out in the field. This portion, though, was cut by the saw, so it is a little bit more straight than would otherwise be. Now what I want to do is I want to measure 6 inches from the end. And I'm just going to pick a spot up here and mark it. And then I'm going to use my speed square to try to get as straight of a line as I can. You don't want to go much more than 6 inches in, or you have to worry about if somebody's sitting on one end that it'll fulcrum the other end and make it go like a teeter-totter. Okay, so there's our line for that. The next step for me is to find my center point, which is going to be 43.5 and just a hair more. And so I will go ahead and mark that point. And then I can measure from my line to that point, and for that it's 37.5. And so that's what I can use for my lower marker, 37.5. Next I'll measure from my line to 37.5, which should be approximately 6 inches from that edge, and I'll measure it again. I've got my 2 marks. So now I can do my line. Sometimes it's kind of hard with the live edge because you don't have those straight edges that you want. And with the rough cut, same issue. But in the long run, I just love the character enough that I'm willing to work with it. So now that I have my lines, I know my placement for my legs. And I will put them so that the screws go right in where the line is. I do need to figure out my midpoint here. So I'll just go right next to it. And it's about 15 inches wide, almost. So you'd be looking at 7.5 would be the midpoint. Remember to make sure that your screws won't poke through the other side. I would like to line it up center of the board, but I'm afraid that that would make it wrong for drilling the holes in. So I'm just going to center it in that portion, the flat portion. That tab is my favorite spot to start because it's easier to get my screwdriver in there, and so I know I'm not going to move it as much. So let's see if it'll sit up okay. I think that looks like it'll do just fine. Because this is going to be available for public use, I want to make sure that it's going to last as long as possible. So I'm using Varathane's Diamond Wood Finish, which is supposed to be the hardest one. It is clean up by water, so that's great, and non-yellowing, which is super important to me because I don't want to change the color of the wood at all. I just want to preserve it. Now that is an interior finish, so I'll have to make sure that I bring this inside for winter time and that it doesn't go out in the sun, but it should be in the barn during the fair, and I'll just bring it back home in between. The directions say not to shake this beforehand, which I wish I had read that before I shook it, but that's okay. So what it does when you shake it, I guess, is it makes some bubbles. So we do have some bubbles here, but not too many. I just love how that brings out the color of the wood. So we'll see just how much it changes. You know, even stains that say that they don't change the color of the wood are still going to change it a little bit. So I'll be intrigued to see what this ends up finishing as. I actually went back through with my air compressor and I did some extra blowing on the top of it because there are some little pits in it, you know, like where the ants crawled through or just where there were little knots that I wanted to make sure that I was able to empty so that I didn't get a bunch of sawdust stuck in there. And then I'm going to do the ends as well as the sides, but I'm not going to worry about doing the bottom. Now we just need to let it dry, and in 2 hours I'll come back, I'll do a second coat, and then I'm all done.